Hi, everybody. This is Dan Chun, co-founder of Hawaiian Islands Ministries, and we are inviting you to join us for this amazing podcast where we hear great stories of equipping and health that leads us to hopefully renewal in our lives and maybe renewal for all of the islands in the world. And we have with us today a wonderful guest, Dr. Matt Stanford from Houston, Texas. In fact, he is coming to Hawaii. September 12 and 13. First, he'll be here on Oahu, and then the 13th going to Maui as we talk about very important mental health issues. So I hope you can join us for that. You can go to himonline.org, himonline.org, and you can register there soon. So, Dr. Matt Stanford's with us from Houston. Aloha, Matt.
Aloha.
Glad you're
Thanks
with us.
for having me.
And Dr. Stanford is the CEO of the Hope and Healing Center and Institute in Houston, Texas. And he's also the adjunct professor at Baylor College of Medicine and Houston Methodist Hospital Institute for Academic Medicine. And he has been to Hawaii several times, and he's a wonderful part of the HIM family. He has been featured in New York Times, USA Today, Christianity Today magazine, and he has written some amazing books. The most recent one is Madness and Grace, a practical guide for pastoral care and serious mental illness. Previously, he wrote a wonderful book called Grace for the Children, Finding Hope in the Midst of Child and Adolescent Mental Illness. And if you go to Amazon, you can see all the other books he has written. So welcome. Glad you could be with us today.
I'm happy to be here,
Matt. Well, you are in a very important ministry, Healing Center, Hope and Healing Center in Houston. Tell us a bit about what this center and institute does as you are the CEO.
Yeah, the Hope and Healing Center and Institute is a ministry really with a mission to increase access to care for those who are struggling with mental health problems while really sharing the love of Christ with them. We really see faith as an important part of the recovery process. So we do a number of things to try to increase access. One of the problems in the U.S. is that a majority of people with mental health problems never receive any treatment. And there's a number of reasons why. So we try to overcome some of those. So one of the things we do here at the Hope and Healing Center is we have a clinic for people with serious mental illness. We use an integrated approach to care that includes faith. They go into about a year-long outpatient program, and it's all free of charge. We pay for their medicine. We pay for everything while they're in that program. And all of the people that we work with, they have diagnosed mental illnesses, and so schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, depression, things like that. And so we get very good results in relationship to their treatment. We also, and probably our primary thing we do, is we equip churches, schools and workplaces to be front doors to the mental health care system. So we started out in faith communities. We go in and we train faith communities on how to recognize mental health care problems, how to make a referral to professional care, how to relate to someone in distress or their family, and then how to set up restorative programs within the faith community. We do the same thing in schools, both public and private schools, and in workplaces. And one of the things that a lot of people don't understand is that when people are dealing with these psychological problems, they're actually more likely to engage a clergy before they go to a mental health care provider or physician, but few clergy feel equipped. And so we really feel that the church has a huge role to play in not only recognizing these individuals and helping them get to professional care, but also being a supportive, healing family, community for them to walk along with them and share the love of Christ as they recover from these illnesses.
Well, and the amazing thing is, I hope you all out there didn't miss it. It's free of charge, all this wonderful service and therapy. And so you exist primarily by donations and I assume grants.
Donations and grants, that's right. Finances are one of the main reasons that people are not able to access care. And then also insurances limit the amount of care. They would never pay for a year's worth of care the way that we provide it. And so we try to take that away. No one's turned away whether they have money or they don't have money. The majority of people, 60% of the people that come to the Hope and Healing Center do not have the resources to pay for care.
That's crazy that you can do that. And of course, you and I have talked earlier I would love to have that kind of center and institute here in Hawaii. That would be so amazing. And someday we're going to figure out the formula
Absolutely,
so that
absolutely.
that will happen.
We're all
And
for
we'll
it.
work with you. Yeah, it can be very alliterative. Houston and Hawaii,
Perfect.
the HH thing. Yeah. So not only are you a center for training, you have the word there, institute, which means you do some
Right.
research. And so what is the research showing? If we think of the picture of national mental health, what kind of trends do you see? Any concerns? What's happening out
Well,
there?
we're really at a bad place in the mental health space in this country, really worldwide, but certainly within the United States. And we've been in significant decline for quite some time. I know we like to think that the pandemic is what kind of brought this all to fruit before us, but really the pandemic just woke up people that didn't already realize it was happening because it kind of brought it home to their house. We've been in decline since probably the late 90s as far as overall mental health goes. There's been a 40% increase in suicide rate since 2000. And at this point in time, for the first time ever in history, a majority of people in the general population report that they have a negative mental health. And so their mental health is subpar. And depression, anxiety are at levels we've never seen before, particularly among adolescents, particularly among adolescent females. And so it's really bad out there. As everyone seems to be recognizing finally. And one of the other big problems is that we have this crisis and we have a significant lack of mental health care providers and facilities. And so we find ourselves in the midst of a really, what we might think of as a global pandemic of mental health problems, and we have really no available providers for them. And that's a problem. And again, I think that's why faith communities are an incredible opportunity, really a divine opportunity, because not only are people more likely to go there first, but it's a great kind of supportive community where people are able to access some level of care really for no cost. And that's one of the things we do. We train those faith communities. So I would say right now the real concern is with adolescent females. Suicide rates are dramatically increasing, as are anxiety and depression. There's a real generational shift. The younger you are, the worse off your mental health. The older you are, the better your mental health. And a lot of that has to do with social media.
Wow. Boy, you just put a buffet of thoughts out there. So I just want to pick on some of those. First of all, is there research, is there data that actually says people will go to their church first when they have some mental health
absolutely. There were studies done during the National Institutes of Health, what are thought of as the Kessler studies, because a gentleman by name Kessler ran them, looking at the kind of the prevalence of mental health problems in the general population. Well, they asked those individuals where they went first. And when they first felt they started having a problem, and the largest percentage of them went to a clergy. And what's really interesting about that statistic is it's not people that are necessarily affiliated with a church or believers in God. It's anyone in the general population, and it really is just an access issue. You can go in and talk to a clergy. There's supposed to be somebody there that will care for you, and it's not going to cost you anything, and you don't have to kind of out yourself from a stigma perspective when nobody knows why you're walking in to talk to somebody at a church. And so I think that's kind of the issue there. The problem is that not a lot of clergy make referrals. They don't really recognize what's in front of them. And so I think, as far as churches go, at least my kind of take on the Western church is that we've gotten so spiritual that we're almost no earthly good. Everything is, we've kind of narrowed what the concept of spiritual is. And the reality is it's all spiritual. If somebody approaches us with a problem, then we have an opportunity to comfort them and care for them and express the love of Christ to them, whether they came to us because they have a financial issue or a mental health problem or a spiritual issue. And I think we've just kind of narrowed that, and we've really kind of insulated ourselves from problems in the community. And we really need to return to that. I often give an example. I think about, we used to build small towns On the frontier, we used to build a town around a church. The church was in the middle of the town, and if you needed money for seed for your farm, or you needed someone to help you build a barn, or you needed marital counseling, you went to the church. And I think to some extent that still is happening, but I think the church isn't prepared to deal with it.
So here a pastor should be referring people to therapists, and oftentimes they don't. But we're in a bind right now, aren't we, that if a pastor did want to refer someone to a therapist, it seems the therapists are all backed up. There's a long, long line. They'll say, maybe you'll get on the waiting list. Maybe I'll see you in a few months. And so I'm assuming that's the brilliance of what you're doing at the center. You're trying to train more lay leaders, not that they'll be therapists, but lay counselors who are skilled in at least helping and being empathetic and listeners. And then again, another source of referral.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is that true?
Absolutely. There's, it's one thing to say, refer to a mental health care provider. And as you said, if you can't get in, you can't get in. And depending on where you live, there may be more or less. 60% of the counties in the United States, which includes Hawaii counties as well, don't have a psychiatrist. 60% of the counties. And so there's a lot of rural area out there. And so we have to do something about this workforce gap. Most people engage the system when they're in crisis. They don't have the ability to wait 6-8 weeks, even sometimes 3 to 4 months, 5 months. Mm-hmm. That's just not going to work. And so what we're hoping to do is really try to build a continuum of care like we have in physical medicine. If you think about physical medicine, if you woke up this morning and you had a headache, you would not try to make an appointment with a neurosurgeon. But that's what we do in mental health. If you wake up and you're having what you think is a mental health problem, excessive anxiety, whatever, you have to go to the high-level licensed provider. There's nothing between you and the high-level provider. But for physical medicine, the first place you go to the pharmacy and you buy some Motrin, and you try to take care of your headache yourself. And then you might go to an urgent care, and then you might go to your primary care physician. And we can just build our way up to higher and higher levels of care until you're actually hospitalized, and then we begin to build our way down. Well, nothing like that exists in mental health. We have just a limited number of high-level providers, very few psychiatric beds, and then nothing on the backside. So our goal is to use pre-existing organizations like faith communities, because we know people are more likely to go there first, schools and workplaces, to be front doors to the system. And so we train congregations, we train everyone in a congregation, if a church wants us to, on those 4 R's: how to recognize, refer, relate, and set up restorative programs. We then put mental health coaches there, which are kind of a lay paraprofessional that can provide some level of supportive care that's been demonstrated to be therapeutically beneficial, but all from a faith perspective. And then we also put support groups there, which have a long history of reduction of symptoms and improvement of quality of life. So we're taking advantage of these supportive care options on the front end so that hopefully fewer people have to go to the higher level providers. And you can access mental health coaching and these support groups and things like that for free when they're offered through faith organizations or nonprofits or things like that. So we do that collaboratively right now with the American Association of Christian Counselors, and nationwide we have over 50,000 people that are going through our mental health coach training, and we've developed one now for youth, individuals who work with youth. We have it available in Spanish as well. So it's really going well. We have a lot of research around what these individuals do. For instance, just to kind of give you an idea of the effectiveness of it, when we did a big study of about 1,000 active mental health coaches about a year ago, we found that on average, those people see 4 individuals a month. So if you think about that, just imagine for a moment that you had 50,000 individuals out there trained as mental health coaches that are working in schools or faith communities or workplaces, and they're on average seeing 4 people a month that are struggling with a mental health care problem. I mean, right there, you've increased the access to care without any increase in financial responsibility of the individual. And so our goal is to get mental health coaches in every church. And they not only serve as a supportive care option for individuals where they work with them one-on-one or provide a group or whatever, but they also help them move to professional care, which takes that burden off the pastor. It allows the pastor to just be the pastor and doesn't expect them to somehow become a referral option.
Wow, amazing. So let's get back to some of the earlier things you said. A growing sense of anxiety, worry, I would assume a depression. What are the causes? What's happening in America that's causing this?
Yeah, like I said, it's been a decline, a pretty consistent decline since the late 90s. So say 2000 is where, we're looking at 2 decades of pretty significant decline. And it's a variety of things. And some of these are, they have their own issues. They cause their own issues. And some of these things just make other things worse off. And so, but they're all interrelated. One thing I would say is in our culture today, we have an incredible lack of relational connection and support. In fact, you'll see, I know most Time Magazine, things like that have had articles on loneliness is the problem of the day. Well, really what that is a reflection of the fact that we have absolutely no relational connection or support. We've lost that. Our families are disjointed. We have lots of families where both parents are working, the kids are involved in activities, they never meet, there are ships that pass in the night. We have more and more people that aren't attending church regularly. I think that is playing a significant role. Our faith communities were the support structure for most of our culture for a long, long time, and we're really losing that. And then you begin to add in the idea of we communicate in a different way now. We don't communicate face to face. I mean, look at you and I right now. You're sitting in Hawaii, I'm sitting in Houston, and this is wonderful that we're doing this. It's, it's space age, and wonderful. But the reality is that even if you were here in town, it's not, wouldn't be surprising if we were having this exact same conversation, this exact same way. And so people do this even within their family. So we don't communicate in the same way, and so we don't have the connection and support that we need. So when we have a minor struggle, we have no one to talk to, and we're losing the ability to have that conversation. So that's one thing. Another thing is that we really have very limited resiliency and ability to cope with stress, particularly in our younger generations. They just simply have not been trained how to deal with stress. And you see that when they just fall apart at the simplest stressor. I'm not talking about a major event like a 9/11 or something like that. I'm talking about the smallest thing. Someone said something wrong, bad to them, and granted they may be upset, but they absolutely fall apart into a puddle. We also have lost the use of language in the sense that we call people Nazis, and we refer to people that say something ugly to us as a violent act. And so we've lost the ability to be resilient in the sense of stress. And that's something that we teach our children. One of the examples I give is, we hear a lot in the news about how when children were isolated during COVID, that had a detrimental effect on them. Well, the reality is if you look at the data, what you find is that parents that did well during the COVID lockdowns have kids that did well during the COVID lockdowns. And parents that fell apart had kids that fell apart because the children they're modeling what they see from their parents. So a lack of resiliency and coping, particularly in younger individuals. Technology and social media are absolutely rewiring our brain. If you look at most of the data, we had a dramatic increase in these things starting at 2010. We can't get away from bullying. We have constant comparison. We're exposed to things we should not be exposed to. Kids are exposed younger and younger to extreme views and pornography, and social media and technology can be wonderful things, but the way they are right now, they are destroying our society, and everyone knows it. You're not going to find anyone who says it's not happening. It's just that no one knows how to kind of regulate it. And then a couple other things. I think we honestly have increasing societal stressors and demands. I mean, how many? I saw somebody the other day. They put a meme up that said I'm tired of being involved in historical events. It's like every other day it's some major historical event. There are a lot more societal stressors and demands. Look, we just all went through a pandemic. And so And then also one that I think a lot of people don't think about is we are a very unhealthy society. We have a lot of obesity, a lot of metabolic problems like diabetes and things like that, and those just contribute and make these problems all that much worse. And we have a real tendency to emotionally eat. We eat a lot of processed foods, and that just makes things all that much worse. I'm not saying that if you just have a good diet, everything's going to be great. All of these things kind of go together. But those are just kind of 5 things that I see and that most people kind of notice are really kind of driving a lot of this stuff.
Well, and you think about the international or national events that have happened just in the last 3 years,
Absolutely.
right? Black Lives Matter. We're worried about our sustainability or the environment more than ever before. We've had a difficult presidential election. We're probably going to have another difficult presidential election. We had, attack on the Capitol, and more recently, international wars.
Right.
And so and here in Hawaii, we've had horrible fires
Absolutely.
on Maui, which I'm glad we can address that through HIM.
And if you think about it from a spiritual perspective, I mean, the fact is that there's no, for people that are just kind of out there and separated, what you see growing in the data on people's faith is that people say they're spiritual instead of religious, and so what that means is I'm really a lone ranger out there, and my spirituality is just for me and private, and I kind of make it up as I go, and that's where I find comfort. But the reality is that's not how God made us, and so more and more people are leaving, particularly mainline denominations. Those congregational Sunday mornings are going down and down and down. People don't have that connection to other believers. And that really kind of works through a lot of this stuff, and that's really a tremendous thing that the church can do to help people. If you can just simply provide support, comfort to individuals in your congregation and give them hope, you can lay a foundation for better mental health.
And what's tough due to the pandemic, a lot of churches went online, but we may have created a Frankenstein.
Absolutely.
That for many churches, 2/3 of their congregation are
That's
still
right.
online, 1/3 in person, and we've created the god of convenience. Oh, I can just roll out of
Absolutely.
bed. I don't have to get out of my pajamas. I can still eat waffles and drink my coffee. And you know what? I don't want to listen to the music at the beginning. It's more like a TED Talk. I'll just wait for the sermon and fast
That's right.
forward.
Or
if
in
it's
fact, I
recorded.
won't even watch it on Sunday. Maybe I'll watch it on Tuesday afternoon. But what do the scriptures tell us? Don't stop assembling like the pagans do. I mean, that there's a real modern truth in that. And churches are hiring. I see it all the time. Even my own church, we've hired a pastor of online. There's a whole congregation online now, and it is the culture of convenience. But we just don't understand. It's convenient, but we lose the most important part of getting together, and that's being together.
Yeah, and the community,
Exactly.
the community is deteriorating, and by not going to church in person, you don't see, oh, Uncle Harry's
Exactly.
limping. What's wrong with Uncle Harry? I better sit down next to him. Or there's, Aunt Ruth, and I think she had cancer, I heard last month. I better drop by
Right.
and just see how she's doing. And that all has been blown apart because of the pandemic, and we've created a wonderful online where the online's a front lobby now, and people are checking
Right.
it out. Now, you mentioned earlier that you mentioned adolescent girls seem to have the highest, I don't know what the noun is, anxiety, worry, or depression. Why is that? And what are they the highest in?
Yeah, adolescent girls, you're seeing significantly higher increases in suicide rate, and you're seeing much higher rates of anxiety and depression in them. And really, probably, and what the suggestion is that's driving that is social media. Adolescent girls are affected by social media more than adolescent boys. Adolescent boys are more likely to be involved in gaming. And it's kind of oddly ironic. We were absolutely convinced. Like when Columbine happened, you hear all this discussion about these shooter games. They were going to make all these boys violent and all that. And well, ultimately, the data has not panned out on any of that. The gaming has little to no effect on the aggression of adolescent boys. And adolescent boys don't use social media at nearly the rates that girls do. But what social media is doing is it's this, it's the famous quote, comparison is the thief of joy. These young girls are comparing themselves to what they're seeing. They also, and they're not able to live up to this impossible standard, and they also are unable to get away from kind of ugly comments about one another and things like that. Because in the old days, when you and I were at school and somebody said something ugly to you or bullied you, at least got to go home and not have to deal with it for a few hours before maybe you go back the next day. Now you can't get away from it. And so social media is particularly detrimental to adolescent females. Plus, we have increasing rates of things like eating disorders, and those are primarily the disorders of girls. So we have a real problem with our adolescent females. The other thing that I think has a lot to do with it, again, back to this idea of kind of less relational connectiveness, is that we know that women are socialized in such a way that they're very verbal, and they're more like they find even more benefit in connection and being together and and talking and things like that. And again, social media and the way our society is structured is pulling that away. And so I don't think that's affecting males as much. It is affecting them in a negative way. But social media is just really more of an adolescent female phenomenon than it is an adolescent male phenomenon.
Well, do you think there is a biological difference between men and women's mental health as well as boys and girls?
Yeah, I do think there's a difference. I mean, you do have different rates of different disorders. Women are much more likely to have depression. Men are more likely to have some other disorders. Men are more likely to have substance use issues. So there are some differences in that, and then that's been discussed for decades. It's not clear why that is. A lot of times it has to do kind of with socialization. Men are much less likely to seek out help. Women are much more likely to seek out help. I mean, any clinic, even our clinic, the predominance of the clients are going to be women. Men just don't seek out help. The kind of old...
More women in church,
More
too.
women in church. Well, it's relational. Church is relational, and men. When Barna interviews men, they tend to say that churches are soft and it's feminine. And what they're talking about is the relational aspect of it. They think of it as not. I guess they don't realize that Jesus is very relational. He's got these 12 guys following him around all the time. I mean, he's a very relational guy. We want kind of the man's man type of thing. So again, I think socialization plays a role into it as well. We obviously have never really taught men to share or express their feelings. And the more you hold in, the more of a problem you're going to have. So I don't think we have to totally alter our gender roles and things like that. What I do think we need to do is we need to make opportunities for connection. And I think, again, that's where faith communities come in. They are not only an incredible place for you to grow spiritually, but they're an incredible place for you just to gain kind of daily therapeutic support, where you can just share like, hey, I'm not doing so well today, or I lost a job, or whatever. There's no other place like it, and there's certainly nothing in the secular world that's like it. But we're seeing that kind of fizzle, unfortunately.
So if you were talking to a group of people and someone were to ask, what's the relationship between spirituality and mental health, what would you say?
Well, what I would say is the first place I think we have to go to is we have to think about how God has created us. And God has, if you look in the scriptures, God has created us as a kind of a multi-part being. Sometimes I say different facets. So we know we have a body. We all agree with that. And certainly the scriptures talk about us having a spirit or a soul. I would say that we have four aspects to our being. We have a physical body. We have a mind. We have a mental aspect to our being. We have a spiritual aspect, and we have relationships. And I get that from, if you look at like Luke 2:52, it says Jesus grew in wisdom and stature and favor with God and man. There's the four parts. Same thing when Jesus talks about the greatest commandment. He says, love the Lord your God with your whole self. And he talks about physical and non-physical aspects. And then he says, love your neighbor as yourself. So I kind of see those as the four aspects of our being. And when I see a person with a mental health problem, I also recognize that that mental health problem affects them at all of those levels. It affects them physically, mentally, spiritually, and relationally. So I see every problem, whether it's a mental health problem or a physical health problem, as a spiritual, having a spiritual aspect to it, because God made part of us to be spiritual. But we're a unity of those different parts. And so, if I just say, okay, well, Dan, I know you're struggling with depression, so all we're going to do is just focus on your spiritual life. It's just a spiritual problem. Well, then I'm just ignoring how God has created you. Because I know that depression has physical aspects, I know that it has mental aspects, and I know that it affects relationships, but it also has a spiritual component. So with the approach that we take at the Hope and Healing Center, we engage a person at all of those levels. I think that's true holistic care. An example I give a lot of times is, there's two. When an individual has a heart attack, one of the first referrals that a cardiologist makes for them is to a psychiatrist after they've had a heart attack, because people start to see their own mortality and they oftentimes will go into a depressive state. So that just kind of gives you an idea of the connection. But I remember my own father, who had horrible heart problems for most of the last half of his life. And for the last several years of his life, he had an artificial heart. But I remember when they were about to take him in to have him to get the artificial heart, I'm sitting there by his bedside, and right before they wheel him down to the surgery area, a woman came in and she said she was from the company that makes the heart. And she said, "I'm here to do your spiritual assessment." And I was like, well, heck, I got to hear about that. That's very interesting. So I just sat there, and she asked him 10 questions, and they were very generic questions around, like, where do you believe? Do you believe in a supreme being? Do you believe that being is involved in your healing? Do you pray for healing? So they went through these things, and so after my father answered these questions, they took him, and I stopped her in the hall and I said, "Please tell me about this. Why are you here doing this?" And she said, "Well, we have found that people of faith that see a transcendent God involved in their healing do better with our product than those who don't have it." And I thought, wow, if a company, a for-profit company understands that, how much more should we understand that they understand there's physical aspects, they understand that there's spiritual aspects to healing. We should recognize that as well. We don't need to focus on any one aspect. So I would say with mental health problems, there's absolutely a spiritual aspect, but let's not ignore these other aspects of our being, and let's help people get a holistic approach to care where they're getting kind of the full breadth of what God has provided for us here on earth in the context of healing.
That's amazing. And I thought I did read a research report that if you are a person who prays, you might have a better mental health score
absolutely.
Or physical health
Individuals
score.
that are, the data is clear, individuals that are actively involved in a faith community, that see their faith as important, they are more physically and mentally healthy. The data is absolutely clear on that. And that is actually taking out the effect of just being involved in more positive health behaviors. Less smoking or things like that. So they are absolutely more healthy and do have better mental health as well.
So here's people are listening to this, and they may have some questions right now in terms of self-diagnosis. How do you know if you have clinical depression?
Okay.
How do you know if you have an anxiety disorder? And then I'll throw a third one out to you, Dr. Stanford. How do you know if you, and I should say you or your loved ones, how do you know if you or your loved ones are showing evidence of dementia or Alzheimer's? Okay. So let's start with clinical depression, then we'll go to anxiety disorder, then dementia.
Yeah, with depression and also anxiety disorders. So we all get sad, and we all get worried at times or stressed. And being sad and being worried is a far cry from having a disorder. And I think that's where we get confused a lot of times. So you really have to kind of define, what do you mean when you say disorder? And so what we're talking about when we say disorder is you cross over a line where it's not really possible for you with social support and that type of, to be able to work yourself back across that line to health. So and you're not functioning normally, fully normally. So yeah, we always ask people how they're doing at work, school, or in their relationships. And what you find is when a person crosses over the line of disorder, so for instance, if they have clinical depression, then at least one of those three spheres of daily living are going to be impacted in a negative way, to where like they're not able to go to work, or they're not doing their job as well, or they're not getting along with others well, or whatever that may be. So the level of functioning is minimized. You're not functioning normally, and the intensity of the problem is more than just what kind of time and support can get you beyond. So with depression, for instance, what a person needs to ask themselves is, what is the level of the intensity of the sadness that you have? In fact, most people that are depressed don't really talk about sadness. They talk about hopelessness. They talk about worthlessness, things like that. So the intensity is so much more than just being sad. It's not just being blue. And then the functionality. It's the same thing with the anxiety disorder. We all know what it is to worry, but you cross over this line of not being able to function normally, and you're not able to kind of see progress to where you're getting better. I mean, let's say that you had a pet that died, okay? That makes people sad, makes people very sad. Well, as the days go on, you should see some progression away from that sadness, and that you're more functional. Another thing I would say with depression, for instance, is most people that have clinical depression can't remember the last time that they felt happy. And if you were to say, hey, Dan, let's just go see this funny movie, it'll make you feel better. You would be like, no, I don't want to do that, and even if you went, it wouldn't make you feel any better. You would find no joy in it. Whereas even when people are fairly sad, blue, they can have moments where they feel happy, and they can certainly remember when they were happy before. So it's the depth, and it's the functionality with depression and anxiety. As far as dementia goes, we all have to understand that we all certainly have aging declines. And unfortunately, the thing that makes it so confusing is we all age at different rates. And a lot of that has to do with, our diet and our level of exercise and our genes and, all these different things. And so, we all should expect there to be some change in our memory as we grow old. But is that change in our memory significant to where it is beginning to impair our ability to function normally on a daily basis? I mean, we certainly all, if you've always had a bad memory and now you recognize that you have a bad memory, do you have a worse memory than you had? I mean, that's kind of the thing. A lot of times you have people, older guys will say, oh man, I just can't remember anything. And then the wife goes, well, you never could remember anything, even when we were young. So it's really about a change when you're talking about dementia. How are you this year versus last year? And really with something like dementia, it's really very difficult for the individual to assess themselves. It's best to ask a family member to say, have you noticed that I'm forgetting things? Have you noticed that my memory isn't as good as it used to be? Things like that. And obviously memory is kind of one of the first things. You also can have some mood issues in relationship with that, particularly anxiety or depression, irritability. But it's best to have an external person help you evaluate that. Now, I would say with all of these things, this is one of the problems that we have in relationship to mental health, is that these are things that, just like you said, people ask me all the time, well, how do I know if I have depression? How do I know if my wife has an anxiety disorder or whatever, or dementia? But yet we never go to a professional and have them assess us. We never have a mental physical. And so there's nothing wrong with discussing these things with your physician. Many times a physician has short scales that they can use to assess your level of depression or anxiety. They certainly can talk to you about dementia. If you are concerned about these things, there's nothing wrong with going to a counselor for a single session and saying, hey, I'm concerned about this. Or going to a neurologist and say, I'm concerned that I may be having a memory issue, and then having them refer you for an assessment. Why worry? Why wonder? When these things can be assessed relatively easily to make that determination. It's also not a bad idea if you're concerned about dementia, maybe it runs in your family, to go and get an assessment and have a baseline for yourself, so you really have a good sense of whether there is any decline or not.
Well, it seems for the anxiety, depression categories, that also may be hard to self-diagnose of when do you need to seek a health professional. You almost need somebody else.
It can be. It's certainly
to
it's easier to assess that than say something like dementia. But I would agree with you. I think it's always best to ask a close relative, a wife, a husband. Ask them how you're doing, because they're going to notice it first. Families almost always notice it before you do.
Yeah. So, what do you we're a performance-driven society, it seems, and we're also noticing, I don't know if it's a huge rising number, but there are a number of athletes who have stopped competing because of mental health issues, they
Right.
said. What do you think of all of that?
Well, I think that that is. I would say that is reflective of the fact that we have a very good mental health conversation going on in our culture. We just don't do a good job of providing the mental health support and treatment that we need to provide. And I think that those individuals, because they are, these elite athletes and they have a lot of resources around them, they regularly have counselors and therapists that work with them to kind of keep them, a lot of these things they compete in are very mental, and kind of keep them focused. I think they are more attuned to things like self-care, in the idea that, being aware of how you're doing. And so I think they also have been given, I think they feel like they've been given permission to kind of pull the plug on something to protect themselves, where I don't think most people feel that. I think most people in the society go, well, yeah, I may be struggling. I'm having a lot of depression, but I got to pay for my family. I got to get to work. I don't have time for this. I'm a guy. I can't, that's weakness. I just got to have to push through like my dad did, that kind of a thing. I think most people don't feel like they have that kind of permission. So I think that's where we need to get to as a society. We need to get to a point where we have just a lot of general support for people, so that we catch these things really early and they can kind of talk them through and maybe get some support group help or mental health coaching or whatever. And they have permission to say, hey, I'm not doing so well, so I'm going to step away for a moment. We're such a competitive, performance-driven culture. We don't even really give women time off when they have a baby, from work. So it's, if we're not going to give someone time off really for that, we certainly aren't going to give them time off when they say, well, I'm not feeling so good mentally today. But we've got to get beyond that. Again, I think this is a great opportunity for the church to say, hey, you know what? It's okay to not be okay here, because none of us are okay.
So that was good
Right.
modeling. That was good modeling by the
Absolutely. That's
athletes,
fantastic modeling.
pulling out of a gymnastic competition
Right.
or a tennis
And
international competition.
think about the stress, like a Simone Biles is under all the time. She's the greatest gymnast in history. I can't imagine what kind of stress that is. If she wants to say, hey, you know what? I'm not up to this time. I'm stepping away. Who am I to judge her? That's her
Right.
mental health. So I don't get to watch her on TV this time. Big deal. So I think that
Right. And it's dangerous for her.
Absolutely.
She couldn't figure out the twisting.
Absolutely. I think that
she could
that's
break her
great
neck.
modeling. And that's the kind of modeling we need. And we need that modeling from our parents to their children. We need that modeling from bosses to their employees. And we need that modeling from pastors to congregants, so that we have to stop the kind of facade that we're all okay. We're just all okay.
Yeah, and when I think Naomi Osaka pulled out of some
Right.
competition and even didn't show up at a news conference, they thought, oh, you're not showing up at a news conference. That's horrible.
Right.
You're paid a lot of money to show up. And it is a tension, though, don't you think, Dr. Stanford, between coddling and giving permission, right, to step
Right.
away?
No, I do think that, I mean, when we talk about somebody like Simone Biles, and all that she's accomplished, and now she has this issue, and she says, I'm stepping away. That seems significant because she's accomplished a lot. It's different if you like, oh, well, I don't think my boss really likes me, so I can't go to work anymore. I'm just going to stay home. I mean, there is a kind of a, some people refer to it as a weakness. I don't know that I would call it that, but a coddling, that we, and that gets to this idea of a lack of ability to deal with stress, and the way we cope with it. So there is a gradation. I mean, there's no doubt that Simone Biles can deal with stress. And when she says she can't,
Yes.
we should respect that. But we also have to help people understand what they can deal with and what they can't deal with. Because people deal with stress at different levels and in different ways. And some people can deal with much more and some with much less. So I think we have to be careful, although I certainly recognize that, and I've seen that, this idea of coddling. But we do have to help people understand what they can deal with and they can't. And then what we have to do is help them learn how to be able to deal with the stressors that they engage in their daily life, normal levels of stress.
That's great. That's great. Just a few more questions. Here, if you could suggest one thing that would improve our mental health, what would that be? Or maybe it's one or two things. I mean, is it exercise or diet? Is get back to community? I mean, what would one thing you would say?
I think you
hey,
hit,
people, here's a takeaway. Here's a
there.
takeaway
I
for
think
you
you
all.
hit two of them in there. I think number one, I think you need to get into community. I think, my take on that would be you need to get involved in an active spiritual community where you are not only growing in your faith, because we know faith, people that have active faith lives have better mental health, but also that you have a supportive community around you where you feel like you can share your issues and you can minister to others that have problems as well. I think that community issue is really what we're missing. And I would say, secondly, I think that I'm going to say three things. I think one would be community. I think the second would be regular exercise, because there is little doubt that the data shows that individuals that struggle with anxiety do much, much better when they exercise. I mean, even things like yoga, 6 weeks of active yoga has the same effect for somebody with an anxiety issue as an anti-anxiety medication. I mean, there's great data on that. So, and you don't have to be, have to go out and become Arnold Schwarzenegger and pump iron kind of thing. Just become more active. That's the better way to think about it. So go for a walk 3 times a week. These are opportunities for you to de-stress and learn how to relax. And the third thing I would say kind of gets back to the first, and that is you have to regulate the amount of technology and social media that you are engaged with. I know it's impossible for us to get rid of it, and certainly it makes our jobs easier. I mean, look what we're doing right now. We're having this conversation right now, and you're halfway around the world from me. So it can be useful for us from a productivity perspective, but it's killing us from a connection perspective. And so you've got to regulate it. You've got to say, I'm going to have periods of time where I don't use it. I'm going to minimize my use of social media. I'm going to take time with my family or my supportive community where I don't have the phone with me. I mean, if you do nothing else in your family but make sure that you eat dinner together regularly and there are no phones at the table, I promise you it will improve your mental health.
And some families, they leave their phones in the car when they walk into church.
And that's a great
Because of
idea.
the temptation, that you're watching things. And when you say social media, we're not just talking about TikTok or Instagram. We're talking about the news cycle.
Absolutely.
Too,
You never get away. And when I say, and I would say technology and social media. So I would say, hey, instead of texting your friend right now, call them. Instead of calling your friend, meet up with them for coffee on Friday and talk about the issue. Don't sit at the table and text while you're all eating dinner. You're texting a friend and your wife's texting a friend and your daughter's texting a friend, and none of you are engaged with one another. I mean, you just have to regulate it. We don't have any problem, saying that we want to regulate gaming. Like, oh, he games too much, so you can only game 1 hour today. Well, just regulate it. And in the time that they're not on social media, or you're not on social media or using technology, you need to put into that the idea of actual human connection and communication.
You know, there's a huge percentage of our population that works for the government. Is there anything governments can do to help mental health?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot they can do, really more from the perspective of providers. I think, some of the problems with the limited providers we have are regulation issues. So, for instance, you guys are literally on an island, okay? And so you're out in the middle of the ocean and you're far away from the mainland. But here in Texas, I have states around me. But if I have a license to practice in the state of Texas, I can't practice in Louisiana, even though it's right next door. Or I can't practice in New Mexico. So if somebody in New Mexico wants to do a virtual session with me, I can't work with them because of that. But yet I can just drive right across the border. So we need to get smart about how we deal with our licensure. We need to have more reciprocity between states. We also need to come up with other levels of providers within mental health. One of the things I say all the time, I mean, for a long, long time, I was a psychology professor at different universities, and psychology is one of the most common majors on any college campus, yet very few people that get a psychology degree ever go on to graduate school. And when you have a psychology degree, undergraduate degree, there is no job for you with that degree. It's not like having an accounting degree and people are lining up to hire you. So we have all these people that are interested in psychology that get these degrees, yet we don't provide any level of credentialing for them. We need to come up with lower levels of credentialing so we can provide these kind of supportive community. So that's another thing that governments can do. I think what we've done has been very ineffective, and that is trying to do it from the top down. Let's somehow get more people to go to medical school, get more people to go to graduate school. And like, for instance, I always remember when I was in graduate school, there was right outside the statistics class I would go to, there was a little thing hanging on the bulletin board that said, if you signed up for this program, they would pay for your graduate education if you would then do 2 or 3 years on an Indian reservation after you finished. And so I understand the premise there. Let's bring somebody into this rural, under-resourced community. But the reality is virtually no one's going to sign up for that. That's just, you got to think in a different way. What about engaging Native Americans and empowering them to provide the support and care for their community? And so that's the kind of thing that government can do, but we're really far away from that. They're just not thinking that way. And hopefully we can get there. And hopefully the things that we're doing here and that others are doing, trying to demonstrate that we can provide really significant levels of care through faith communities and schools that are therapeutically beneficial will make a difference.
Great. One last question, and then there'll be one last request. The last question is, if there's one myth you would like to bust about mental health, what would that myth be?
That myth would be that you can just think your way out of a mental health problem all on your own. There are certainly some things you can, but if you have a mental disorder, you cannot think yourself out of it. It's not a sign of weakness. It's not something you should be ashamed of. You look in the scriptures, David is horribly depressed at times in his life, and none of us would say he lacked faith. So I think we have to understand that these are medical conditions like any other condition. They can be effectively treated. And we should be supportive of people who have them, just like we would be supportive of someone who had cancer or diabetes.
Great. And now this last request. We've talked about the growing trend of anxiety or depression. We've talked about the threat, the constant threat of social media. So I ask at the end, give us a word of hope. What would be a word of hope in the midst of these challenges and difficulties?
Well, I mean, for me, and the thing that really drives my life, it caused me to leave academia and to take over the Hope and Healing Center and have been here over the last 10 years, is the fact that people that are struggling with these problems are more likely to go to faith communities first, whether they believe in God or not, whether they've ever been to a faith community or not. What an incredible divine opportunity. And we know that we have a hope that transcends circumstances. We have Jesus. It's not just a feeling. It's the creator of the universe. And he, in the context of our faith, transformation is what we're all about. We're all about not only being transformed spiritually from a salvation perspective, but then sanctified over time. It's a process. So faith communities should be the most receptive places for people that struggle with mental health problems, because we have hope to offer them and supportive community. And I'm excited about what is going to happen in the future in mental health through faith communities.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Matt Stanford from Houston, Texas. As we say here in Hawaii, mahalo nui loa. Thank you very much. And again, if you want to read more about Dr. Matt Stanford's work, you can pick up his books through Amazon or your local bookstore. Plus, if you go to the Health and Hope Center in Houston, or on the website, that you have a lot of resources there too.
Absolutely.
That people could look, video resources, written resources. So please, you want to say what the website is that they
simple.
can go
just
to?
go. It's just HHCI, Hope and Healing Center and Institute, hhci.org.
There you go. Really easy. And also, thank you for joining us on the HIM podcast, the Hawaiian Islands Ministry podcast, where we do hope. Not only are we giving you some equipping, but we're giving you some hope. And if you do want this podcast to continue, you might want to consider supporting us through himonline.org. So God bless everybody. Thank you and aloha.